Hey, welcome to the fine print, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host, Caleb Teskey, coming at you with another great guest tonight, as usual. Before we get into that, I got a couple of shout outs, also as usual. Uh, hey, one for my man Keith at Edwards. I woke up the other morning to a phone call, and he was sitting in my driveway with a little swag bag for me, and it's always nice to see Keith, a super hardworking guy. Growing a great product down there. I hope your season's going well, Keith. Also, we got one more. Patrick Walsh up at Mountain Grown of Vermont. I got a little of Patrick's flower there. Looking really good, Patrick. And I'm going to be smoking on some of this apple fritter for the interview today. I think that's about it. We're just going to go ahead and get the guests right in. And this is a guy I've had on my show a couple times. He's coming back now, and bang. It's Dan Pomerantz from Rebel Grown. Dan, thank you for being here tonight, man.
Right on. What's up, Caleb? Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, pleasure. And the reason I reached out to you initially was because we've been having this kind of insane weather here in Vermont this year. And I wanted to talk to some outdoor cultivators about the way that they've been handling the challenges this season.
Sure. Yeah, it's been quite the season. Tell me what you want to hear about.
Well, I'd like to hear, I know a lot of people are dealing with septoria, which is something that I'm just learning about. And I'd really like to know how you mitigate all of the water coming through. And I don't know how you guys handled the flooding there that happened. But that's really what I'm interested in here.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so, everyone's got a different situation. My property, up above me is the top of a hillside, and I'm on a hill. So we escaped any like terrible damage from flooding. I've got a long driveway, like you've been here before. So there's like 5 or 6 culverts that need to get maintained. And one of those culverts got washed out and the road washed over. But the culvert stayed in place. So it wasn't like a super expensive fix. Our big saving grace this year is I got a vegetable bed former because, the last couple of years, and really, I've been doing hemp here since 2018, and, we rototill and then we make our nice little, beds and plant, but it's kind of like a flat field. And the idea was that I wanted to elevate the beds. Number one, being elevated, I figured that the roots, cannabis roots like to grow wide instead of deep. And I figured that if we could have the beds elevated where we could get our roots to hit a side, that might trigger them into, flowering earlier and finishing earlier. And then if we have it elevated, it would be more airflow and slightly warmer root temperatures. And so, I invested in this vegetable bed former. So all of our, rows, instead of being flat in the middle of the field, are kind of up. And what happened was the rain just kind of would run down the aisles in between. So that was like our big saving grace. Like my biggest field didn't really have too much damage because everything was elevated. One of my other spots, like the smallest field that's down below my house here, like a whole chunk of it pretty much just never dried out. So there's 3 rows that are kind of closer to my road where I need to redig drainage ditches. And it's like, plants couldn't really grow. It was just totally saturated. And then I've got another field, by the cabin, and same thing there. Like there was a couple rows close to the road that just never dried out. We're super saturated. We had like a Durban cut where, everything else seems fine. And 32 plants just kind of straight mush, just couldn't really, ever dry out. And so, yeah, really tough year. I've been growing weed in Vermont off and on for 23 years. And I remember in 2008, we had a really rainy summer. And I remember I counted that year in 2008 that it rained 23 days in June. And this year it rained 24 days in June. So yeah, it's a big washout. And then Septoria, we've been learning as much as we can about it the last several years. Figuring out like, as we were getting ready for getting a license and growing weed here, aside from doing hemp and a few field trials and like testing genetics, like I didn't really know how all my genetics would perform here. And so the biggest part of it is the selection process. And we do a ton of R&D. And, these first 2 years have grown a lot of different varieties from seed, a lot of different varieties from clone. And so it's cool. Now we have certain stuff that's been, tested and proven 2 years in a row that can be resistant, where all the plants around it, you know, have bad septoria. And you know, Owen, who works here, Owen's got a great mind for plant science, and you know, he's been really determined that this isn't just septoria, and that there's different, you know, bacteria and fungal things that are all in the environment. And just like the weather, especially this year with all the moisture, has been perfect for those things to really just take over. So he's been in touch with like different like university professors and kind of doing his own research. And in order to combat it, you know, like I'm super old school, so my style is like healthy plants are healthy plants. Like if you do a good job as a cultivator and you dial in everything from like your mother plants and your seed stock and your nursery to the timing and your field preparations, and if you do everything right, then whatever, you know, problems you have in your environment, they're going to be problems, but your plants will kind of shine through them. But you know, most of what we do is treatments with biological stuff. So we inoculate our soils with a lot of different microbes and fungal, you know, species. And then with spraying, you know, rotating like pretty much any time that it's been sunny out, you know, we had like a sprayer built that we could, you know, pull behind a quad and hit 3 rows at a time. And so basically we try to maintain and optimize plant health by, you know, spraying the type of foliars that I do with, you know, different, you know, fish hydrosylate and sea algae extracts and microbes and enzymes, all these things that I normally do to colonize the plant or benefit the plant's health. And then basically, you know, hitting them with different microbes in the evenings, you know, whenever it's not raining. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot we could talk about. It's been a crazy year for weather.
Yeah,
And
well,
then,
that's why I hit you up, Dan.
yeah. And then, I mean, lastly, the thing is, I've always got this belief that, you know, nature balances itself out. So I've been saying all year, you know, while trying to like get through this summer, you know, we didn't really have a summer. It was just kind of cloudy, you know, and, you know, I think last summer I went to the lake every day, like Lake Elagos down the road. So usually we like, you know, go to the lake when it's hot, you know, whether I take my kids, you know, at the end of the day or whatever, bring our canoes, kayaks, jump in the lake. And I think we only went to the lake like 3 or 4 days this whole summer. But I do believe that nature always balances itself out. And now look at this beautiful Vermont fall that we're having. So we got a good forecast for the things that are doing well and thriving can finish out nice and strong.
It does seem like the forecast for the next week or two here is looking pretty good.
Yeah, for sure. You know, 2 years ago, let's not forget. So 2021 was the latest recorded frost in the history of Vermont. So when they recorded the top of Mount Mansfield and all those places, like it was pretty late into October before we had a frost in 2021. And then last year was bad. We had a bunch of early frosts and freezes and, you know, but anyway, so we're due. And if you look at the Farmer's Almanac, it also predicts like a nice kind of warm finish to the fall.
Is that Farmer's Almanac accurate? I've never looked at it.
You know, really know about how they come up with it, but I think it's you know, there's a lot of insight and intuition that goes into it. And a lot of times I think it's just as sensible as looking at what's happening in nature and seeing where the balance is needed. You know, it's like you have a really wet summer, you know, you think you're due for some dry weather, and now we have a nice fall with 70-degree sunny days and no frost in the forecast.
Well, it's nice to hear you didn't get smashed by that flooding, man, because that I got a couple of interviews coming up with some folks who got hit by that. And, you know, that was one thing I was really concerned about.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it definitely was bad. Yeah. I mean, I was actually doing deliveries that day. So I was on my way back from Burlington and people started telling me like, are you sure you're going to make it? And then, you know, I was driving through Waterbury, and when I hit Morrisville and I took Route 15, you know, it was like probably an hour or two after I passed that the river came up over Route 15. So, you know, it was crazy.
Yeah, it's a good thing you didn't come back through Johnson.
Right.
The whole downtown the grocery store was half submerged down there. It was fucking wild.
I know. Yeah. Real good friend of mine and his family live right down the street. Their whole basement was flooded up to the top of the stairs. And, you know, a bunch of people I know in that area had to be evacuated, and pretty crazy.
Now, earlier you mentioned selecting genetics for this type of shit. And I know certain people have selected genetics to deal with the climate up here, the temperature changes in Vermont in the short growing season. Is there certain genetics that lend themselves or hold up better against this amount of water?
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting, because I started making seeds in Vermont in like 2008, 2009. And really my first, seeds that I was making in Vermont weren't quite intentional. It was like I had a plant that hermed in a grow room, and then I ended up with some seeds that I could test out. And then I started doing some kind of like small pollinations and selections. But, you know, my whole seed company was really started on the West Coast in California, where I'm breeding for total opposite things. Like a lot of what I'm looking for in California is drought resistant. So, I had years and years of selections where I'm looking for, resin production and
Oh,
breeding.
your audio's breaking up a little, Dan.
It could be my internet. I got Starlink. My internet comes and goes.
Okay, cool. I just want to let you know. If it gets super bad, I'll let you know.
Yeah,
But
just
it
let me
did
know.
cut out for a couple of seconds. But I thought what you were saying about California was super interesting. So out there, you were breeding for drought resistance.
Sure, like that's one of the traits. Like a lot of times my breeding program would be a bunch of little like, hoops or tents that I would build. And I'd build them in the shade or under the forest canopy because, it's just too hot to like cover them with plastic while the pollinations are happening. And generally those plants don't get taken care of as well. So I want to see how they handle the stress of kind of drying back too much, and will they still kind of shine and be something special? Like for instance, one line that I did, I like dry farmed stuff in California in like a raised bed in my vegetable, garden in the backyard. And then it's like I had 4 females of one variety, and they were all starved, so they didn't really grow big flowers. They had resin, but just a lot of leaf. One of them, however, was just like looked like it had been nurtured all year. It had beautiful chunky buds. So if you ever grow the F1 from my radiation exposure, it's specific to that plant that just showed that it could thrive even though it was grown in drought conditions. And so then I start playing with my genetics in Vermont in 2018 and learning totally different things about what does well here under which conditions. And what's really cool about since we got licensed last year, we grew so many different things, like our starling, for instance. Like we had like 200 of those from seed last year, and then we cloned 60 of them. And then from those 60 we had like 3 main production ones that we were excited about, tested out all the others in small quantities and in the indoor. And now we have this second year of all the, once we harvest everything and smoke everything, and all the ones that were ran in the indoor, it was like a small R&D run. So anything that showed intersex or herm traits got pulled right out. So by the end of smoking through and lab testing all this Starlink, we're going to have either a couple different things that have a different spectrum or profiles and flavors, but it's going to be a real winner that does well here, handles the septoria, grows well obviously under rainy conditions, and still has like beautiful amazing herb that's going to hit like 23 to 26% THC.
I was going to say, if you're this is an interesting combination here, because if you're breeding genetics out here to handle the Vermont weather and maybe the short growing season, and then also in California where you got some genetics that handle the or drought well, I don't know, or it's, have you ever mixed any of the Cali genetics with the Vermont genetics to find something that might work well, like in both places or something?
Kind of, I mean, it's, breeding is such like a infinite work in progress, so there's just so many different things you can do, and you're limited by your space and your time. But, I started taking my genetics that were mostly started working in California and testing them in Vermont 2018 and 2019, 2020, really small quantities. And then 2021, going for it a little bit more. But what I would do here is I'd set up like a little 10 by 10 hoop that's covered in an agricultural fabric, and I'd grow 50 or 100 seed plants like I usually do for breeding in California. And then, I would select that down to 3 or 4 males. Like I know my lines pretty well. So if it's like a lemon sugar kush or a double OG chem, like I know what traits I'm looking for in those plants based on the generation. So if I have 100 seed plants and 20 or 30 males, and I'm selecting the top 3 that I think represent, the best of what's in there, then those go and open pollinate the entire female stock, everything that's in that generation. So when those flowers are done, I can look at 20 or 30 seed plants from seed that are females, and I can say, okay, wow, which are the ones that really shine through and, have the best flowers, and sometimes, some of them start to mold off, those are seeds that I don't grow or don't keep, because I'm just looking for the best. And, in terms of breeding for the climate and, being resistant to septoria and moisture in the East Coast and drought in California. I mean, that's never been the goal. The main goal is to breed for quality. Like,
yeah, and I fucked up there. I want to just acknowledge I did fuck up there. You said you're breeding for drought on the East Coast, and I was like, I thought you said rain, and then I thought combining the two would be a good idea in Vermont. But yeah, that was my bad. I messed up a little there.
It's all good. I mean, the number one thing that I look for is quality, right? And so it's like if I have different flavor profiles and spectrums, I've got my sours and my OGs and my earthy stuff and my floral stuff and my fruity stuff and my hazy stuff. I want something of all of those that's unique and different, that's going to be like the best of what's there. That's really going to be something that's valuable as a production plant, but also valuable and special as like a connoisseur smoker, someone who's looking for something really, really unique. And so it's like looking for quality, but then finding the plants that'll check those boxes that are efficient to grow. So yeah, it's cool. I was actually just checking did I just lose you on the internet?
No, you're good.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was actually
I pop in and out.
Okay, I see what you're doing.
When you're speaking, I like to focus on you and then kind of pop back in with follow-up questions and shit. I should have gave you the speech before, but I forget.
No, it's all good.
But anyway, I was working in my buddy's farm all day and I'm super zapped, but
that's all good. But yeah, I mean, I was checking out our breeding, area earlier this afternoon. I hadn't been up there in like a little while. So I was kind of curious about how things would look. And it's like, some stuff they're in pots and it's kind of for seed production. There's stuff that's like dried out that hasn't been taken care of as well. And you can see certain things that have like the negative, impacts from being, root bound in small pots and drying out. And then there's other stuff right next to them is just thriving, doesn't need water, and the plants are just super greasy. So the only way to learn about that stuff is by testing it out and just getting more experience growing it in different conditions.
How long would you say it takes for you to like lock down like a certain genetic that you're going to eat? Like how many different trial runs do you do before you're like, all right, we're going to this is a keeper?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you're looking for. It's like if it's quality, you can grow something one time, it's like you grow a bunch of seeds and, it's not always too hard to find something that's really stellar, that's just way crazier than everything else. Then it's about growing that from clone, in different environments and kind of seeing what it does. So, generally when I find a clone that I think is special, I give it to different friends of mine so they can test it out and see how it does indoors and see how it does in this area. And what I'm used to in California and the Emerald Triangle is like different regions. So it's like, Southern Humboldt, like I have a farm out there that's on the east side of the 101, and it's like, 50 minutes up a mountain. So we have a really unique kind of distance from the coast, and we have rivers and, creeks that bring moisture when it gets really hot and dry. So we have a really unique kind of appellation and microclimate. But I know what my genetics look like grown there compared to 10 miles inland or, in northern Mendocino in Laytonville, or like coastal Mendocino, or all these kind of like,
really
sub climates. Vermont, I'm kind of just learning it because, I've been in Craftsberry for, 11 years. But the season, there's so much differentiation in what you get in the summers. Like, you can have hot, dry summers, and you can have, soaking wet summers. And
this summer. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you find something special and then it's, it's special. It's just a matter of whether it'll be special in different climates. And like I said, we just flowered out all our moms indoors to test a bunch of stuff that we'd never grown indoors. And so it was cool. Like, we had stuff that was really nice, but if it showed any, male flowers or intersex traits, we pulled it out. And that's something that, we can't offer those genetics to an indoor grower, like.
Can you tell us for people that might be watching, or actually, let me pop this comment up. I want to ask you about intersex traits, but I got a comment here from Alex Grosser, who I've been talking to a lot. He says, I love the double OG Chem and purple blue. I don't know what that is, but I know what the double OG Chem is, but yeah, thanks for watching, Alex. Appreciate your comment, man.
So what do you want to know about which?
Well, could you tell us how you identify intersex traits on a cannabis plant?
Yeah, well, I mean, intersex traits are basically just like that it's showing both male and female flowers. So it's like, if you're growing something outdoors, most things that even have intersex traits, they rarely show them on outdoor plants. So I'll have plant populations, you'll grow hundreds and hundreds of plants, and it would be pretty rare for most stuff that I see to show any male flowers popping up. Indoors, is not how cannabis is naturally grown. So it's like we're creating an artificial environment and controlling the environment, like playing God. And our mom space is great for keeping moms alive, but it's not like a sealed room. It's not like a super fancy, facility or anything. And also, we're new to these LED lights, so we've been playing with the intensities and the spectrums and trying to figure out what would be appropriate. So we flowered out. Owen has all these details because really Owen is the head grower here, but it's like we had
peace to Owen too. I've been talking to Owen a little bit. You got some beautiful stuff going up there. He seems like a decent guy, man.
Yeah, he's a real good dude. But we had I want to say over 60 different varieties and like 100 different individuals that were flowered out in that mom room. So for instance, like I'd mentioned the Starlink earlier, we had all these standouts that we cloned from the field last year. And when they flowered out, some of them just showed, some male flowers popping up on the bottoms of the plants. And that could have just been because, there could have been too much light intensity as we were figuring out, how to dial in the right spectrum of the lights. It could have been, us figuring out the right humidity to go with these LEDs. It could have been a stressor in the environment that was causing it. Or it could just be in the genetics. But either way, if you're testing something that you might want to share with other growers and you see male flowers popping up and any signs of hermaphrodite or kind of intersex traits like that, you don't want the liability of seeding your crop or someone else's future crop. So unless you were going to exclusively grow that cultivar outdoors, and you just got to toss it out.
And I want to stop you for a second because you said something about the lights, and it just reminded me that you've been doing this so long that you probably grew up on the high pressure sodium lights and the metal halide lights and that kind of shit, huh?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, my first light was a 165 watt HPS that had like the built-in, ballast. And that was probably 1997, 98. But HPS is still very relevant. HPS grows really, really amazing weed. And, if you go back 5, 6, 7 years and people started talking about LEDs and people would ask me, what's your opinion on LEDs? And I'd say, I have none because I don't have any experience with them. Like at the time, our mom rooms that we were using were all high intensity lights, all metal halide or HPS, and started using like the double-ended, bulbs and stuff like that, and Gavitas and the PL systems. But I couldn't really comment. And all I would say is, listen, like when the technology is advanced to the point where I see my peers that are like, really talented indoor growers all switching over and showing me weed that tastes as good or better and showing me production numbers, that maybe I'll switch. And then I think during 2020, I noticed that a lot of operators that I knew were starting to switch over LEDs and are showing proof of the increase in the yields. But then people would show me their weed and I'd be like, I still don't think it tastes as good as the HPS. But I think at this point, there's just so many things. It's like, it's more responsible to go with the LEDs so that we can have, less heat issues and less requirement for, the air conditioning and keeping the climate cooled. And so overall kind of more energy efficient. And I think they're proven in terms of what they can do yield wise and the penetration into the canopy and just like the technology and the way that it's advancing. Like there's,
Can I stop you there? Because that's something that one of my friends mentioned to me is the canopy penetration. Do you mind speaking on that for a second?
Yeah. And again, I'm an outdoor grower. So I used to grow small batch indoor way back in the day, but I really pride myself on growing naturally outside. And the indoors, like eventually we'll build out year-round flowering here, but it'll really be small batch and mostly for testing out genetics. So there's a lot of people who can speak on this with a lot more expertise than I can. But basically, yeah, the high intensity discharge lights and the typical high pressure sodiums and the PLs, like you lose the intensity of the light, as it goes down vertically. So like once you get below, 24, 36 inches into like the canopy or really away from the light, anything below 36 inches and like a traditional HPS is really not getting a lot. But these LEDs and the way the diodes and the spectrums work, which is again, not my expertise, it penetrates deeper. So you can get this really, great light intensity and light, readings that are further down into the canopy, so you can actually get nice chunky growth on the lower parts of the plant. And so it's really kind of revolutionized the way that people grow indoors. Instead of your typical kind of grow short, squat, bushy stuff and try to have all the tops, like this and everything else cleaned up. It's like a different ball game, because now you can grow plants on these tables that really have, flowers from here, and they can go all the way up, and you still clean up the bottoms and all the leaf and everything. But, you can really pack on, weight and flower into the canopy, going lower down.
Mm. And I've definitely heard some of my friends who grow talk about this same similar concept. Thanks for explaining that. I want to slap this up here. I'm with Dan Pomerantz from Rebel Grown in Vermont. I like to slap that up every 10 or 20 minutes.
Right on.
Can I ask you, Dan, because I know you got the mixed license. Do you have any indoor going yet?
So, so I'm allowed to do 1,000 square feet. And we've got our mom room, which I don't remember if you were in the mom room when you were here at one point, but it's basically the basement of this house that I have. And I think it's probably like 400 something square feet. And so the goal is to eventually have the 1,000 square feet of indoor to do mostly like, testing of genetics, like run 2 lights of this and offer like exclusive, like small batch, a couple pounds of this, a couple pounds of that. But for now, I don't have the space, because the barn that I have that has electricity, where we would build our flowering space, is where we store all the product, right? And then I have another barn, but that barn is off the grid. So like we can run a generator and dry in the big barn, but after that weed is off the drying lines, we, pack it up into boxes and totes. It goes back to the other barn where we have electricity, so that we can control the climate and keep it like stored nice and keep it fresh. So what I'd like to do at some point, I know like a lot of people in Vermont, some of your viewers think I'm like some like wealthy, rich dude or whatever, but it's a big misconception. In fact, even the CCB, I'm going through like a battle with them on my social equity, which I should keep private, but like, sorry to change the subject, but to like read this to you, this is what the CCB is saying about me in court. Basically, is Appellate Dan Pomerantz is one of the most socially advantaged and prosperous entrepreneurs participating in Vermont's nascent regulated adult use cannabis marketplace. And that's just total bullshit, because I've never had any other job that's paid for anything that I have except for cannabis. I've got no savings. I got no 401k. I got no family. And so everything that I have, is hard earned. And the only assets that I hold are real estate licenses and cannabis licenses. Nobody's ever funded my operation. I've got no investors. And I see a lot of people out there that have pretty small operations, and all of a sudden they're putting in some pretty expensive infrastructure. I know how much shit costs, And so here I can't even build out my indoor because we don't really have electricity or infrastructure or money to pay for things like that. But my goal would be.
This is from what was that statement you just read right there?
So they rejected me for social equity 3 times, and I appealed it because I'm entitled to appeal.
And I remembered hearing actually some of your public comments as well, and I remember this was from a while back, huh?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a matter of principle, and I probably shouldn't get into it too much because it's like an ongoing thing.
Sure, yeah.
But like,
why do you qualify for social? Do you have weed charges or something?
Yeah, I was fucking arrested for weed and pled guilty to a felony and was incarcerated, so it's like, that's
why is that even a question? That clearly fits into the letter of the law as I've read it.
Eventually what happened was I was able to get into this program through the court system there. And basically I was able to not get any prison time. Technically during my sentencing, I was sentenced to 2 to 5 years in prison. And when that happened, my girlfriend, really my fiance, she started crying, and the judge is like wanting an explanation for all this stuff. And I talked my way out of it with the judge. It was a really incredible moment. And so technically the only time that I was incarcerated was pre-trial, and I was bailed out inevitably. But
you still got a felony?
I got a felony. I dealt with it years later, but yes, I pled guilty to a cannabis felony for possession of cannabis and was incarcerated. So technically that meets the requirements. But the thing is, the CCB is backtracking and saying, well, that's not what we really meant it to be. what we've always intended is we want the law to be for people who are only sentenced after like trial. Like
that was a rule change that they just tried to
well,
make.
it's not an official rule change. It's something that they want the rule to be. It's
yeah,
not
they drafted it in their new draft of the rule proposals. I saw
right.
that, and I thought that was bogus because I qualify for social equity because my dad got arrested and did jail time.
Yeah, well, you would.
Yeah, but if they're trying to say like that you don't qualify, I think that's unfair because you were arrested and got a fucking felony.
Well, on top of that, so when they rejected me, I was like, I want to appeal this. Like, I'm a social equity recipient in California. I sent the same paperwork to the state of California, and
you got the social equity in California
2 years in a row. Yeah, so I have 2 state licenses there, and one of them hasn't cost me anything for the last 2 years because of that. But the other thing is, the other part of it is being from an area that was disproportionately targeted through cannabis prohibition and being harmed in it. And so I was like, all right, well, you guys are rejecting me for that. I want to appeal, but also I qualify for the other reason. So I want you to interview me on that because I lived in Humboldt County, and, you know, Humboldt County has some of the highest drug arrests, violent crime, housing issues, all the things that on a national level qualify an area as being disproportionately targeted, you know, by cannabis prohibition. You know, that area, it's not even a question, right? It's listed as a high intensity drug trafficking area. It's got, you know, documented, you know, the first time that
there's a documentary called Murder Mountain,
which is, you know, that's not far from my neighborhood. I used to run a bunch of farms and drove past that Rancho Sequoia every single day in 2015, you know, and I've been up.
Oh, I lost you, Dan. Oh no. Whoa. Your sound has completely cut out, Dan. I hope we can get you back because I was really getting into this.
Yeah, so
you're back. Oh,
yeah,
I lost you there. That's okay.
It's probably
carry on.
But so you need to show that you're from an area that was targeted and that you were harmed by it. And so I told them some pretty personal stories of shit that happened that I think has had a pretty big impact in my life or caused a lot of you know, life-changing decisions and stuff. And they basically wrote me a rejection letter and said, we agree that you and your family went through some hardships and traumatic experiences and that it was, you know, caused from living in that area, but it wasn't the type of harm that we intended this to be for. And they go, and I don't want to quote them, but what they essentially said is, but after all, you were able to establish yourself in good standing in the community and in the industry and acquire real estate properties. And it's like, there's nowhere in the law that says anything about whether people like you and you have a good reputation or whether you own real estate. But I think I applied for this type. A lot of people have this misconception that I'm like, you know, some like wealthy person, but like I've been poor most of my life. I've been homeless before. I definitely know what it's like to struggle. I've overcame a lot of struggles that most people probably never would. You know, like I'm just a pretty hardcore dude that's, you know, devoted my whole life to weed.
Sorry, I almost set the smoke alarm off there.
No, it's all good. But so anyway, I didn't mean to get into the social equity thing too much.
No, it's cool. I appreciate you sharing that, man. And I know, like, you know, I was curious about the social equity from the very beginning when I heard the board talking about that stuff. And, you know, it seemed pretty clear that if you've been arrested for weed charges, that would constitute as being negatively impacted by the war on drugs. In my opinion, at least the way that I read the bill, it seems like you would fit right in there. And I want to drop this in here too. We got Andy Mine. Good evening. I grew a clone of the Rebel Grown Starlink I got this season.
Nice.
Thanks, cool. Andy.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the best. Sorry to get sidetracked on the social equity. I got triggered because I was getting frustrated that I don't have the barn space to build my indoor out, you know, because it's off grid. And what I'd like to do is take my big barn and be able to afford making it like a solar and battery and inverter system and backup propane generator and have net zero energy, move my trimming and processing and all my dry storage over to there, and then take the current dry barn and turn that into the indoor. But yeah, that's cool that you're enjoying the Starlink. I think we did several different clones that we put out to people. So that's always exciting. I think the best reward that you can get, you know, in weed is sharing it. And I like selling plants and clones and seeds a lot more than selling weed.
Can I want to do this. I want to, you sent me a few pictures earlier I'd like to just pop these pictures up on the screen, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about it.
Go for it.
This was the first one you sent me right here, man.
Right on.
What are we looking at, Dan?
So that is the largest, field that I have. What's cool about that property, it's right next door to where I live. And so it's kind of like a guest house, and that's where we trim and store weed. And I knew the 3 previous owners, the guy who built it, and then a woman was there with horses, and then it was a retired veterinarian. So it's kind of like horse pasture and cow pasture for years before we started even building up the soil more for growing hemp. You're just looking at a row of an OG sour Durban cut that we selected last year that we're running in there.
All right. We got a couple more. We got 3 more. I'm just gonna let's see what we got here. Wham.
That's one of the Starlinks. From looking at it, there's a couple different Starlink clones. One of them we just call the re-veg one for now because we re-vegged it from last year. They're all kind of coded by they have numbers in front of them, and it's usually which field it's in, the row that it was in, and the plant number. So there's a 1204 or a 1519. So row 15, plant 19, shit like that. But yeah, that's definitely a Starlink.
Let's see what we got right. Yeah.
That is a photo that Owen took of the Double OG Chem 15. So the Double OG Chem 15 is, I'm
gonna put it back. Keep talking. I'm gonna leave it up there for a second because that should look beautiful.
So I don't want to sound like I'm patting myself on the back too much, but so I went back to visit in California in May. I went to attend the Emerald Cup, which is my favorite cannabis event and really incredible gathering of all the most amazing, inspiring people in the community. A lot of people that I look up to, and we won first place with that clone. I've been entering the Emerald Cup since 2011, and that clone, when it was a seed plant in 2018, won second place, and it also won the Breeders' Cup, which means that it was the Breeders' Cup is won by whoever gets closest to first place that bred the strain. So in 2018, the first place winner was my friend Jason I can't believe
lost you again there for a second. Oh, there. Hold up. Sorry. You said your first place was your friend Jason.
Yep,
you said something about your friend Jason, and you got cut off right there.
Yeah, I was thinking about the cut that he won with is the Green Lantern. So Jason won first place with the Green Lantern. We won second place with the Double OG Chem, but because we had bred the Double OG Chem and he didn't breed the Green Lantern, I won the Breeders' Cup. And so Breeders' Cup, that was a big lifetime goal of mine to win the Breeders' Cup there. And then in 2022, we also
someone won an award growing your genetics, and you get an award for that.
No, we won it. That was from my farm.
Okay. Sorry, I misheard you. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so that was from my farm in southern Humboldt County. Won second place in the Breeders' Cup. Although, awesome. Back then I was running around the state of California trying to keep the brand alive, and it was grown by my partners, Cully and Rachel, but on my farm. And then in 2022, as a clone, that same plant came in second place and won the Breeders' Cup a second time. And then this last year in May, it won first place in our third Breeders' Cup. So it's really the only thing that's ever won 3 Breeders' Cup. And it wasn't just a different seed plant. It's the exact same cut, won 3 Breeders' Cup, second place twice, and first place once. And then other clones of Double OG Chem from my farm and other farms that I've given it to have won a bunch of awards. So it's really, in California, won more awards, more top 20s in the Emerald Cup than any other variety since 2016 or 2017.
Sick.
And anyway, it's never been grown indoors ever before by anybody. And
it looks, come on.
Yep. And that, nice. That was a little, 10 days out. Owen let it get nice and ripe, and it's drying right now. So we'll be smoking that soon and putting out some real small batches of it because we just flowered out moms. We had 4 of those. So it's not going to be a lot of weed or anything.
Yeah. Looks really nice. So, and we got one more here.
That's the 1519. So when I was saying we cut clones from, we grew 200 starlings from seed. We cut clones from 60 of them. We kept them alive all winter. Then we picked the ones based on my notes that I thought were going to be the best for Vermont. And that wasn't one of them, but we kept the mom of it because it was on the list with good notes and tested it in the indoor, and it was the most fire plant in the whole room. So Now we got to give that cut a name and figure out putting it into production for next year's outdoor crop, and maybe giving it to a few homies to start doing small batches of.
Do you have any contacts at the Emerald Cup that I could interview?
Yeah, I mean that's like my family. I really love those people. Like I'm not much
That'd
of
be
like
dope, dude.
I'm not much of a fanboy, but Tim Blake has done so much for like the cannabis community in the Emerald Triangle, and he's just a really amazing guy that was someone that I really admired and looked up to, and over the years has become a friend of mine, who's just one of the coolest fucking people you'll ever meet. And he honestly,
I saw him on a couple of podcasts, man. That was cool.
yeah. Tim is a writer and really wants people to know about his writing. And like his story is, he's got stories for days, but he also just loves doing media, and like he doesn't have any ego. He's just like a really genuinely good person. He loves connecting with people, loves helping people. So I could ask him if he'd be willing to do your show, and
that'd be sick.
Sure.
We're gonna slap this up. I'm with Dan Pomerantz from Rebel Grown here in Vermont. Dan, I got a couple more questions I'd like to ask you. One was about I heard you make some comments in the meetings about product registration and maybe for outdoor growers, and I was wondering if you would be willing to share your thoughts again here.
Yeah, I was just giving the CCB a hard time. Like their product registration and their packaging stuff is just, it's ridiculous, and it's exactly why I was a weed grower in the first place, because I don't think that it's right for us to be controlled by the government. It doesn't feel good to have authority figures that you can't control have control over you. There's really no place in society for that. That's why I live in the woods. That's why I fucking hustle weed and grow weed. That's why my brand is Rebel Grown. And it's not that I don't want to play by the rules, or my goal in life is just be a good person and earn my karma. But we have these restrictions here for packaging. The intentions of them are great. The intentions is Vermont should really lead the way in sustainability and taking care of the environment. And so, they wanted to find a way for people to not use unnecessary plastics that are going to just end up in a landfill. So I think that's great. And Kyle, who came up with that, I commend him for like that intention. It's awesome, but they went too hardcore with it, and they did it too soon, because they had a market that didn't exist that's just going to start overnight. Boom. All of a sudden there's going to be weed October 1st. And they didn't allow people to use certain types of packaging that's made out of plastic that's consistently used. And I think what they should have done is, there's certain things that are kind of on the edge where it's like, it's kind of compostable, but it's not really, or it's a polymer of something. They should have allowed like the first 6 months for people to do what they needed to do to start their businesses. Cause almost all of us are like, small, we're not like corporations or fancy companies. We're just like individual people starting a brand new business from scratch. And so to be restricted with not being able to use certain materials that are pretty much industry standard makes it really hard to source packaging. Right off the bat, I figured that stuff, I didn't want to deal with it. So I hired someone else to do it, and they fucked it all up, and they ordered like 5,000 jars that didn't fit my jars and made all these mistakes. The other thing is the product registration. Vermont, I don't know if any other state does this. It's like most states, they just have regulations like your packaging can't appeal to kids. It can't advertise this or that or the other. It has to have this language, this warning symbol, this information needs to be accurate. If you get caught breaking those rules, you get a fine, or they come down on you or something. But Vermont, they didn't even allow you to do that. You have to actually register your packaging and get it completely approved before you can even sell your product. And I think that's way overreaching. The other thing is you have to pay $50 for every single product that you register. Then on top of that, the CCB staff, and I don't want to insult the CCB, because to be honest, Vermont has less bureaucracy in its cannabis regulators than probably any other market. So I don't want to hate on them. That's not the intention of this. But there's a lot of people that they could have spoken to. They could have reached out to different people on their advisory panels that are actual experts that know what the fuck they're talking about. And they came up with a bunch of over-the-top stuff that they weren't prepared to handle. So they had cannabis businesses filing and saying, we're playing by your rules. Here's my packaging. Go ahead and approve it. And then you have a lot of people didn't hear back from them for like 6 weeks. People are like, they got their livelihoods on the line, and they're trying to make a small business. and they have a product, it's lab tested, it's ready to go, but the state hasn't agreed that their packaging is acceptable yet. And in most cases it was. And so I just think the whole thing is unnecessary. The other thing that's
you got to get the first, you got to get your packaging approved, then you get the product registered, and you got to go.
It's the same thing, like the packaging, submitting the packaging is the product registration. So they're like, okay, yeah, but like here's the other thing that's a pain. Like, we do a lot of R&D. I have a lot of different genetics here, and a lot of it, especially as we go, is going to be in small batches. So say I'm like, all right, I got my pre-rolls, right? Pre-rolls, double OG Chem, Starling, fucking Golden Grams, double OG Sour, 5G's Red, right? They want you to pay $50 for every variety. And that doesn't make any sense, because it's like, I'm basically giving clean lab tested cannabis, and it's the exact same packaging except the name of the strain and the lineage of that variety, but they want an extra $50 for every single one. It's like that feels like the government stealing from me, when they could just have a sensible conversation and say, our intention is so that people don't package something that is misleading or violating our laws. Simply having a conversation and being like, yep, we're good, you're on the same page, but you have 12 varieties, give us $50 for every one of them. It just doesn't really seem like that makes any sense. But my comment was more
we got a comment here. Hold up, we got a comment here from Green Mountain Greenhouse LLC. Prohibition through regulation.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, legal weed sucks, right? And my story with legal weed is that the only reason that I did it was to have a future, and because my experience that I was having was I was growing all this weed, but I never got to really know who was smoking it once I started, once I got to California and was growing a lot of weed. And that's what I loved about Vermont. Like, I would get feedback in Vermont back in the day. I didn't really, at a certain point, I stopped selling weed in Vermont. Like, I would grow my small batch weed and I would give it all to one or two people. And, usually I had one or two homies in Vermont that would get like a quarter pound. I'd bring the rest down to Boston. And then the only people that I would sell weed to were like friends' parents. Cause I had a lot of friends of mine whose parents smoked weed, but they were like afraid to buy weed from like, on the black market, or they didn't even know who to talk to because they hadn't smoked since like the 60s or something. And so I love that interaction of like selling somebody the eighth, like meeting up with someone and, answering questions and giving them information about what they're getting, instead of it's just a bag of weed, here, smoke it. It's like, well, no, this is what this is and where I got the seeds from and what it means to me. And, in California, I'm growing all this weed and I don't know who smokes it. And so as I started meeting dispensaries and kind of connecting with people, I'm like, not only is this more fun for me, and it's just impactful because the feedback that I'm getting from people is really, really positive, that they want to hear what I have to say. They want to learn more about the genetics. They want to hear more about how we're growing it and why we're doing certain things. And that's really what led me to making the brand was really as a seed company, back in 2011. And so it's like, man, like a part of me could have just been like, I'm going to grow as much weed as I can and make a lot of money until I get shut down by the law. But what I wanted was to be able to do this into the future and know that nobody can ever stop me from doing it. And that's why I went legal. I went legal because I figured if I played by the rules, then I could, if I proved that I could add value and stand out in that class of people who's going to be legal, then in 20 years, 30 years, I could still be doing it. Where if I just try to do it for money, I could just get shut down and get busted and it could be over tomorrow, So that was the intention of going legal in the first place back then, was to like have longevity and have a future, and also make an impact and do something positive with how I'm doing it. And so legal weed anywhere just feels like Prohibition 2.0. And that's just what it is until they, it's like, until they let us just, you want some weed, I'll hook you up with some weed. Here it is. We'll keep track of our stuff like any small business. It's like, you want to buy tomatoes that I grew in my backyard, you want to start a small vegetable cooperative, like it should be very similar to that. It's like, oh, I got bundles of fucking lettuce, I got a bunch of garlic ready that I'm selling. Like, I don't see why cannabis should be any different.
I agree with you. Can I ask you a not fun question that we got in the comments here?
Yeah, sure.
This is from Chelsea Sanders. She said, then why are you so rude to smaller tiers when they ask you questions and want to collaborate with you? Thanks for the question, Chelsea.
I don't know. I mean, Chelsea, elaborate. Like if I've ever done anything that was offensive to someone that was a smaller tier, that's definitely not my intention. I definitely had a lot of really good interactions with a lot of people with all types of license types.
I don't know Chelsea, by the way. I don't think I know Chelsea, but
right. I mean, she's more than welcome to elaborate.
Yeah, if I get another comment here, I'll put it back up. I would like to read a couple of comments from Alex. Alex is a medical patient, man, and he said, good medical benefits. Alex will be coming on the show here soon. Also, he says, I care about the access to good medicine. Your background is an activist for weed. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I tried to I mean, when I started, learning more about like the medical benefits of cannabis and all the injustice of how it became illegal in the first place and all the benefits of hemp, and reading High Times and The Emperor Wears No Clothes, I was just kind of always the vocal teenage kid that was like, everyone else is getting wasted and I'm trying to educate people on how hemp can save the planet. And then, eventually I, was in points of life where, people gave me opportunities to kind of speak my mind and share information that I had. And, definitely giving back to like the medical community, because cannabis is really medicine, whatever you use it for, whether it's to balance yourself out mentally or calm down after a long day. There's a lot of people who need it. There's a lot of people who will literally die and not survive what they're going through without it. One of my first stories of, I've a best friend of mine who passed away, and he was a paraplegic. And it was like, I always say he was kind of like my first medical patient, because he would smoke weed, but he never learned about weed. And so, I would just give him access to like different stuff and put him on to genetics. But I guess my first real experience with medical cannabis was my father's best friend. They'd known each other since 1962. And the guy came to me and he said that he had a friend of his that was like an MIT professor that was going through cancer treatments. And he was getting ready to have a bone marrow transplant, and it typically has a 50% survival rate. And he was wasting away and he wasn't able to eat, and asked if I could provide them some marijuana because he'd smoked it in college and they'd heard that medical marijuana can help people get through cancer and help with loss of appetite. And at the time I, had my grow room in Vermont. This is back in 2006, 2007, 2008 era. And so I brought down a few different things, and I kind of said, well, this is what this is, and this is what this is. And here's what I think about the way that this affects people versus this one, but why don't you try a few different things? And, he ended up really liking one of them, and I, gave him an ounce of it. And, his family, reached out to me afterwards, and they basically said that once he started using the weed, he was able to handle his anxiety. And he started eating and he started gaining weight, and he eventually survived that surgery and became a cancer survivor. And they really, really believed that it was the cannabis that he was using that allowed him to gain back the weight and the strength that he needed to survive that surgery. And that was just so crazy, because those are rich white people, people that are college professors that are very, just anti-drugs and shady stuff. And here I am, like a criminal hustling and growing weed, and, just seeing that impact. But, also, in California, the community that I was in, Southern Humboldt, is really a unique place. It's like a microcosm of cannabis culture and community, and just the whole Bay Area, the whole Bay Area and everything that's gone on there for decades. And to be kind of ingrained in that community and then really accepted into it, and then have these old school people that I would do anything just to get to meet, and that becomes my community, and to be accepted by those people. But they're like, well, you're actually the new, younger, upcoming kid that's teaching us stuff. And so it was a really unique position, that I got to be in, a lot of cool experiences. But anyway, Chelsea, who was saying that I had
Alex said, I love this guy's. Oh, sorry. Alex said, I love this guy's weed. Please give him my number. But yeah, if you'd like to keep commenting.
But anyway,
yeah.
So
please.
whatever Chelsea was saying about, you know, some negative stuff, like she's more than welcome to elaborate, you know, and fill us in on what it is. But, you know, I don't think that I've
Yeah, I
been
haven't
rude
got.
or disrespectful to anybody. I mean, I'm pretty easy to get along with.
And I don't see any other comments here from her, but if I get one, I will read it. I am running out of shit here though, Dan. I did want to ask you, how's the music going, man? Have you seen Matt Scott lately?
So yeah, the music. So I've got a plan. You know, the plan. I've been trying to write when I can find the time, and I have been writing a lot and organizing all my shit. And Matt set me up with a system so that I can record my own vocals. And now that my kids are back in school, the plan is that I'm going to start tracking a bunch of vocals. I have like more than a handful of different producers that I'm working with, and a bunch of artists that I'm collaborating with on features on my shit. And you know, the plan is really just to like finish some of these songs and start, you know, releasing my catalog. Like, hold on, check this out. It's like we're in the studio, like, you know, so this is like some of my music, you know, it's like over 20 years of writing, you know, there's like 150 songs, and I can write a new song, you know, whenever. I'll probably fucking write a song after this. So it's exciting, man, because, you know, my hip hop stuff, you know, like when I was younger in my 20s, I was like trying to be a rapper and trying to do weed stuff, and they didn't mesh. A lot. The story that I kind of tell is like, you know, like I was trying to be a rapper and get a record deal and winning battles and doing stuff in Boston. And then I was doing stuff in Vermont and doing weed stuff. And I just kind of at a certain point, you know, it was hard out there and struggling just to like pay rent and not be homeless. And I just made a choice around 2008 was probably pretty instrumental, where I was just like, you know, listen, you know, I think that it's more likely that I can support myself if I really just focus on weed. If I just focus on weed and how I'm going to like maintain and survive in life and build into something, I think it's going to be easier for me to do that with the weed than it is for the music. And so I went that route, but I always kept writing and, you know, kept freestyling. And now I feel like I'm getting older, and I also got myself established enough where like I want to be able to make the time for the music, because I have a lot to say in the music.
And it was super cool that I got to smoke a blunt with Inspector Deck at Zen Barn on New Year's.
Yeah.
Oh, here we got a comment from Chelsea. Let's see.
Yeah.
It says a friend had sent an email and he was rude with responding saying, "I don't know why you would contact me."
Tell her to share the email. I don't think that's me.
Okay.
Well, I mean, so check it out. So my emails are pulled up right now. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different email accounts, right? I've got the info at Rebel Grown. I got my personal one. I got the Rebel Grown one. That's me, Dan at Rebel Grown. And then I've got like the one for people who are requesting information about seeds and apparel. And then I have another one that is connected to the seeds and apparel and the stickers. And I respond to every one of those emails. And I would say that one of the main things that I've done that's kind of helped me get in a position of having a good reputation is I do a lot of customer service, because when someone reaches out to me, I appreciate their time and their interests. So I generally take the time. There's the only thing that I can think of is one person did send me an email not too long ago, and they were like, "I'm a tier 1 in Morrisville, and I was wondering if you could dry my weed for me." And I was like, "Well, I don't know." I wasn't rude to that person. I was like, "I don't know if you're allowed to transport weed from one licensed spot to the other. You know, I don't know if I can legally even do that." And then they were like,
"Yeah, I don't either." Yeah.
And then they were like, "Oh, maybe we could just figure something out." And I still wasn't even rude to him. I think I pretty much just told him that I wasn't able to do it. But tell her to share the email or send it to me again, because there's a chance that it wasn't me. Well, I don't know, or maybe it's something that I'm not aware of.
Well, there you go, Chelsea. If you got any further comments, I'm running out of shit. Oh, you know what? Someone asked me about. They said they saw a video of you, and maybe you had burlap trellising or something. I don't know who. Yeah, and they said that was interesting, and they had never seen it, and they asked me to ask you about it.
Yep, it's made out of jute, and basically, everyone uses the Hortinet or whatever brand of plastic trellising, and it's really horrible, that stuff. It's like it's kind of a necessary evil because it's just so effective and using, but it's like we use a lot of it. Now, I remember there's just one time that stands out. I was at a farm and it was like after harvest, and they had cleaned up the best they could, but there was like little scraps of it that was left up. And me and my friend were sitting there visiting someone else's farm, and we saw a fucking bird that had it stuck on its legs, and the bird like flew up in the trees. And me and my buddy just looked at each other and we're like, oh man. And so that's something that's, like I said, the CCB, I think it's great that they don't want people using plastics. And that trellis, people use lots of it. Like it comes in rolls of 3,200, feet. And so last year we didn't even support our plants, and we ended up doing all right. And I really just wanted to find ways to grow more natural. There's a company called Conscious Gardeners. I want to make sure that I get it right. It's called Conscious Gardeners. They're based in Southern Humboldt. It's a small mom and pop, husband and wife, raising a family. And they came up with this idea because they really hated seeing all the plastic all over the place. So they had this jute netting made, and it comes in different sizes, like 150 feet. And there's like a 4-foot, and I think there's a 12-foot or something. And I just ordered enough of it to do our biggest rows and our biggest plants in areas that we think the buds are just going to need some support. But yeah, it's a really great product if people are looking for things that they can do to just work on their efficiency with where they can be more sustainable and less wasteful. It's a really great product. It's Conscious Gardeners. I want to make sure I got that right.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for answering that one, Dan. Here's Chelsea again. She said, sorry, I'm just asking. I'm curious to know if you have ever water cured.
Is that the same Chelsea?
That's the same Chelsea.
So I have not water cured.
What is water curing? I've never heard of that.
Water curing is something that I think on the internet, some people were talking about that maybe like a decade ago. And it was basically like you take your herb and you put it in a jar of water, and then you basically, I could be wrong. And I think you put some holes in the jar. And so you let the water drain out the lid through the holes. And then basically you dry it after that. And so it's basically like washing any like residue or stuff that's on your weed. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. And my answer to that is like, what I think is efficient use of water, like if you could, like for an indoor, is you should use water like they do in vegetables at grocery stores, like a misting or a spritz before harvest or something like that to wash off any like dust particles or residue. Like I'm okay with that. But like any type of like submerging a flower in water shouldn't be done unless you're making hash, in my opinion. And I think the people that were talking water cure stuff on like the internet forums in like 2008, 2009, 2010, and small hobbyists just like experimenting with different things. But no, I would think you would lose some monoterpenes and plant oils, and I wouldn't recommend it.
Word up. Thanks for taking that one. Hey, Chelsea, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. Look, one more time, I'm here with Dan Pomerantz from Rebel Grown. And Dan, right now, I am out of shit. So this is the time where if we missed anything that you want to talk about, or if you got any shameless plugs or shout outs or events coming up, now would be the time for that. Thank you so much for your time again. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Sure. I mean, I like talking about weed. I can talk about weed for hours. It's one of my favorite things to do. I would just say if anybody's listening in the Vermont, like, shit, cannabis is about bringing people together, and it's about good energy and good vibes, and I would just say for everyone to just work on having a positive attitude, and that's just kind of it, like I've been very excited about Vermont legalizing weed for a long time. I started fucking looking into this and planning out how I could do this more than 10 years ago. So this is like my ultimate life dream, is to like, do music stuff and be a legal weed grower. Like I can't even tell you how many hours of my life I've obsessively thought about how badly I would love it if I could legally grow weed outdoors in Vermont on my own property without risk of getting busted. And so it's a really big deal to a lot of us. And so we should all be in it together. I want to see other farmers win. I want to see people who are involved in this industry win. I'd also like to see people be more accepting. Like, just as I get to know more people, different dispensaries and different growers, like it's very cliquey. It's very cliquey, like some weird high school shit. There's drama in it. And it's like, we're supposed to be like the counterculture. The counterculture is about I just finished an article that I'm writing for a magazine, and I was talking about the roots and the culture of Vermont and the fact that we were the birthplace of like the Back to the Land movement. We had communes here in the early mid 1960s. You know, in 1970 there was an estimated, you know, over 74 communes and all these young people, and it was all about, yeah, they all smoked herb. And it's just, that's the vibe that Vermont needs to be, is like rooting for each other and like actual community, and instead of seeing a lot of negativity and hating. So quit hating, quit snitching, you know, and really everyone should just be trying to lift each other up.
I think that's a great note to leave it on, Dan.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for your time. Dan Pomerantz, Rebel Grown. I'm Caleb Teskey, reminding you that the devil's in the details, and the details are in the fine print. Thank you for joining us.
Have a good night.